The agenda this week heard the case for a 4-day work week, got advice on how to turn everyday anxiety into a superpower, learned about promising treatments for COVID-19, and fact-checked the occurrence of breakthrough cases. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with writer Mark Schatzker on why dieting will never be the answer to obesity.
Let's just go through some of them here because there's South Beach, there's Atkins, there's keto, there's, well, I don't have to go through the list. There's so many potential diets on offer. And I guess the first and obvious place to start in our discussion is, do any of them work?
Well, the fact that you listed so many would suggest that perhaps not. But what's so interesting is our continued enthusiasm. You know, every 2 years there's a new diet, and we think this must be right. And there's this walk down memory lane. You remember Scarsdale, The Zone. There's a reason, though, it's happening this way, and it's because diets both work and don't work. And here's how it works. Roughly all diets work for about the first 6 to 8 months. You know, the pounds start to melt away. You fit into your old pants again. People stop you in the street and they say you look great. And then you hit this wall around 6 months usually, and you swear the scale must be lying. I'm not eating as much. What's going on? And it starts to come back. So people say the diet worked, I failed. So they try the same diet again next year, or they try maybe a new diet. So that's why we've been kind of on this yo-yo treadmill of continually dieting. But the truth is, for most people, they don't work.
You say they hit the wall. What technically is the wall?
It's their brain. The brain, this is one of the most interesting things about body weight, is that it's regulated by the brain. The same way your brain controls your heartbeat, the same way it controls your body temperature, it controls how much you weigh. And it doesn't like when we start to lose weight. That's why we get hungry. That's why we feel fatigued. But it also doesn't like if we weigh too much. When scientists do overfeeding studies, which is to say they put people in a lab and feed them a whole ton of food, they can't stand it. It's so unpleasant that they had to do these first studies in prisons. And even then people would drop out of the study. But then once they, manage to get them fat, when the study ends, the pounds just seem to melt away again. So there's this idea that the brain has a set point. It has, knows what it wants you to weigh, and it's going to make sure that's how much you weigh.
This is a thesis that, of course, could put a lot of people out of business. So I'm kind of curious as to what kind of reception you're getting out there for this idea.
Well, what's so interesting to me is that we've had this endless culture about dieting. The scientists have known this for decades. The early overfeeding studies were done in 1950s, 1960s. But we've almost as though we've chosen to ignore it, that we think we can control what we eat the same way you decide if I'm going to turn my car left, turn my car right, that we have executive control over our body weight. And it's just not like that. The reception I'm getting from readers is they're like, wow, thanks for making this clear. I had a funny feeling it worked this way. And now, it sheds a lot of light as to how things actually work.
Now, you did something very nice in writing this book, and that is you got to go to Italy. You traveled to Italy, and you came back with some most interesting observations about the nature of obesity in the United States compared to Italy. What did you find?
Well, Italy it's like going down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. Everything we think we know about eating and nutrition doesn't make sense when you travel to Italy. I spent some time in Bologna. That's where we get the word bologna. They call it mortadella. Their version, I'd say it's better, but you can actually see these cubes of white fat. They're not afraid of fat in Italy. They're not afraid of carbs. Northern Italy is particularly interesting because they do not eat a Mediterranean diet. It's not olive oil and fish. It's butter, it's cheese, it's pasta. They revere the two nutrients we've been fighting a war against, which is to say fat and carbs, and they weave them together in these ethereal combinations that are so good the entire world travels to Italy just so I can eat what that guy next to me is eating. They have rules. There's a repository in Bologna of official recipes. They have a golden noodle at the Chamber of Commerce. It is the perfect platonic noodle. So you would think if deliciousness and good food is really the enemy, then you'd expect the Northern Italians to be the plumpest in all the world. And they are just unfathomably thin. The rate of obesity in Canada is 26%, south of the border, 42%. Italy, 8%. It's mind-boggling.
We talk about neuroplasticity, and that's what
Yes.
you're into. You want to tell us what
Yes.
that is?
So, brain plasticity or neuroplasticity is the brain's amazing capacity to be able to change and grow in response to the environment. Unfortunately, so that's good positive brain plasticity. There's also negative brain plasticity, which shows that in other negative environments that include a lot of stress, your brain can actually shrink and become damaged. So it can go in both directions. And my whole research program has been in trying to understand those interventions that bring us to positive brain plasticity, that helps our brains grow and strengthen.
So it is possible to live with anxiety in a healthy way, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
For example?
Think about a situation where there's no anxiety at all, no stress at all. What comes with anxiety and that energy that comes with stress is action. It comes ambition. And so without that stress and anxiety, we would be just laying on the couch all over the place. A lot of our motivation comes from that emotion of anxiety. And so what I try and do in my book, Good Anxiety, is show you how to channel the energy of anxiety from that too high an energy that makes everything spiral down and makes you lose your words and not perform well, to that slot where you are performing best. I always say the best talks that I've ever given in my whole life, I was scared. I was anxious before I went on stage. And that is a great example of channeling your anxiety to perform well.
So should I infer that, because I don't think you're demonstrating any anxiety right now at all in your conversation with me, that you're completely calm and not all that fussed about doing this interview?
I am an excellent actress. No,
well done.
So, when it's a TV interview and potentially millions of people can see, I am a little anxious before, and I just try and tell myself, enjoy yourself, have a good time, just try and share your knowledge. But I have skills that have come with being a professor and being a public speaker. But yeah, there's something a little bit wrong if I'm not a little bit worried, a little bit tense about, is all this equipment going to work? Is my internet going to go out? Are they going to ask me? The one thing that really gets me scared is, are they going to ask me something I don't know the answer to? So as long as you don't do that, I'm going to stay nice and calm.
I'll let you in on a little secret. I feel the same way before each interview, too. So we've got that going in common.
There you go.
Talk to us about your 6 superpowers, because you do mention them in the book about how to channel good anxiety. The 6 are what?
Yeah. So, the ultimate endpoint of learning how to use your good anxiety, you turn the anxiety down and you kind of learn from those difficult emotions. But it took me to 6 gifts or superpowers that I talk about in the book. And those 6 gifts are resilience, flow, mindset, productivity, empathy or compassion, and creativity. And I don't think we have time to talk about all of them, but these are things that are truly enhanced by your particular form of anxiety.
And I think the idea of a 4-day work week is great. There's a lot of constraints around how it's implemented and how effective it can be, and there has to be a lot of flexibility. This is not a new idea. In fact, when I was doing some research for the show, I found that, this idea of a 4-day work week popped up in the 1950s, and people were doing research on it, in the 1970s, and it was predicted then that it was going to be this big new thing. I think what's turbocharged all this discussion of a 4-day work week is obviously COVID. It's thrown a Molotov cocktail through our office windows, and it's making us question everything. And there's no doubt that people want more autonomy, they want more flexibility, they want more freedom in choosing how and when they work. And this idea of a 4-day work week can take advantage of that desire. Now, the concern I have is obviously it has to be to work for everyone, but we also have to see whether the positive effects last over time. So, people often experience regression to the mean with their affect and with their behaviors. So we have to see whether this actually does result in long-term productivity gains or long-term benefits in terms of engagement and satisfaction.
Okay, hold off on that whether it's good for the long run aspect of the argument for a second, because I want to circle back to something you just put on the record a second ago. You say they looked at this back in the 50s and in the 70s. So clearly there are management people who have been curious about this enough to study it. Why do you suppose that in all of these intervening decades, it's never really been tried?
Well, it has been tried. It's just, for something like this to really work, you need large-scale adoption because you're asking organizations to change the way that they do business in a sense. And it has to be a very flexible model, as Andrew said, because there's so many different constraints and so many different issues to deal with. When you're implementing a system like this, for it to be successful, it has to be incredibly flexible. So, what if you have a team and you've got a member of the team who decides they want to take Tuesday off when the rest of the team decides they want to take Fridays off? How does that work? So all of these questions need to be addressed and answered for this to be successful. So that's probably why we haven't seen wide-scale adoption yet. But COVID has been such a big trigger for massive changes in the workplace. It's a good time for something like this to really take hold.
Andrew, how do you get around the conundrum that David just described?
What we do is that we put the challenge to each of the teams. So I don't actually schedule anything. What I say is the key issue is that we need the same level of productivity, or preferably better. We also need to make sure that customer service standards aren't impacted. So each team understands that they need to be able to continue to service the clients appropriately. Now, after that, it's up to each team leader, to schedule who takes what time off when. Now, we don't have a situation everybody takes Friday off or everybody takes Monday off, because then that doesn't work. So if you want a Friday off, maybe you'll get Friday this week, but maybe next week you won't. You'll have to take a different day. The only thing that is consistent is where we have, as I've said, parents of kids who are at school, they probably want to work a 5-day, but they want compressed hours. We leave it to the teams to sort that out. I've never, ever had to intervene since we put this in place, what is now over 3 years ago.
Parisa, I wonder if you asked your own employer, the C.D. Howe Institute, this is something I think we should try. What do you think the reaction would be?
I'm not really certain about that, but I would say giving flexibility, that would be very helpful. This is what workers would need, even at the city, how having flexibility in terms of what time to work or from where to work, really important. But in terms of reducing the hours, that my concern is that, for example, if a work needs to be done in collaboration with other workers, if someone doesn't want to be available in a specific day, how that collaboration would work and how the work can be done. That's my concern about that. But of course, giving flexibility to workers would be increase productivity and satisfaction, and it would be something that even we have seen before COVID time and during the COVID that hybrid model of work from home and also a combination with being at the workplace is going to be very beneficial for everyone.
And Andrew, for how many years have you been doing it this new way with the 4-day work week at your company?
We started at the beginning of 2018.
2018. Okay, so David, tell me this. That's about 3 years worth of data, 3 years worth of experience upon which to make a judgment. Andrew tells us the productivity at his company's gone up 25% since they went to this. Is that enough time to be able to conclude, yeah, this works? You get more productivity when you do it this way.
Listen, it's one company and it's positive and certainly it's going in the right direction. But what you have to look at beneath all of this is that Andrew is offering his team a hell of a lot of flexibility and autonomy. And that's what people want.
Monoclonal antibodies. Okay, let's start there. What are they?
So monoclonal is really just means one type. And so these are one type of antibody. There are two on the Canadian market. One that is made by Roche, a compound called casirivimab imdevimab. and the other by GSK, which is a compound called sotrovimab. And so, when you think about antibodies, these are the proteins that bind to the virus that we make after we get vaccinated, if we get infected, and they're what leads to our immune response. They bind to the virus, they stick to the virus, and that leads to clearance from the immune system. It leads to the virus not getting into our cells and leading to more replication.
How widely are they being?
Monoclonal antibodies.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, do you know how widely they're used in Canada at the moment?
Yeah, so monoclonal antibodies essentially are these. We give them as humanized antibodies or synthetic antibodies that mimic human antibodies in that sense. They're approved in Canada, and in fact, the two compounds that I mentioned have been approved for the last few months. The implementation issues of these drugs have made it a lot harder to actually get to the market and get to patients. And this is because it's an IV infusion. It has to be given again within a certain time interval of testing positive and having symptoms. An IV infusion for a COVID patient means that you have to go see a COVID patient. It can't be done remotely. You have to actually put in the IV and observe them. People are obviously worried about side effects with infusions and drugs that are going intravenously. So, they have been available. They've been used around the world. They're actually quite, recommended. They're the only drug that's actually recommended by the World Health Organization for the early treatment of COVID-19. But the implementation in Canada has been a bit piecemeal. The Public Health Agency of Canada has bought these drugs. They are sitting in all the provinces for distribution. But again, local solutions have made it a little bit difficult to kind of make this a reality for all patients who need to access them.
Is their use more widespread in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw this throughout the last wave in the United States. Some states like Florida actually doubled down on this as part of their reopening strategy to have easy access. Thousands and thousands of clinics in the States, they're paid for and I think federally subsidized. They're recommended for all sorts of patients aggressively in the United States for the treatment of early COVID-19.
We know that there are more and more people who are getting COVID-19 and for whom the symptoms are not going away, the so-called long COVID. It sticks around and the effects are quite persistent and quite debilitating for some people. Do you know whether these medications would work on long COVID?
Yeah, and this is where the origins of long COVID come from, right? So, there is some discussions around whether or not this is a chronic inflammatory disease and is autoimmune mediated, where, these compounds may not benefit as much. But certainly there is, maybe a still an infectious component. And one of the interesting things that's come up is people who are vaccinated, who have long COVID symptoms, a small minority of them, probably 10, 15%, actually get profound changes in their symptoms after vaccine. It really does bring into the question of whether or not all of the infection is gone and mechanisms like this may actually trigger the immune system to clear the rest of it. So, there is a lot of look at monoclonal antibodies as a adjunct to long COVID in terms of describing. It's not there yet, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But certainly, we know COVID-19 and long COVID often is associated with severe outcomes from COVID-19. And so, these drugs have the ability to at least lower the severity of disease. So, they may be able to prevent long COVID complications for, again, people who are able to access them in the manner that they're prescribed for.
I've had 2 AZs, AstraZeneca shots. I've had 1 booster shot, which was Pfizer. Mm-hmm. I've also had COVID-19, so I have those natural immunities built up as well. Am I in reasonably comfortable positioning for not getting Omicron?
Provided you are a healthy person, then you are in reasonable shape for not getting moderate to severe COVID-19 caused by the variants that we have looked at so far. With Omicron, we simply don't know yet how good our immunity is going to handle that virus. We know that when you're immunized, you generate cells that actually get better and better over time. So these are called B cells, and they become memory B cells. And if they're reactivated, they become antibody-producing cells. And those memory B cells, over quite a long period, we know at least 12 weeks, can keep going through an immune response and keep learning more and more about what you were vaccinated against, and that is the spike protein. And during that process, we do know, and this is published data, peer-reviewed data, that the breadth of the immune response actually increases over time. So your immune system is better able to deal with variants. Now, whether it's going to be able to deal with a variant like Omicron is obviously the $60 million question that labs all over the world, including labs in Canada as part of COVARNet, are looking at very intensively. But from what we know about the immune response, there should be some immunity even to variants like Omicron. But the data have yet to emerge to really validate that statement.
Well, this is the big concern, right? Because I guess we're up to about 80% of Ontarians right now or almost 80% who've been double vaxxed, and now some people are going off and getting their booster shots as well. And I'm sure they are asking the question, am I doing all this for naught, given that Omicron may be more powerful than any of the inoculations that I'm taking? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, that's a super fair question that's on everyone's minds. But when you have been vaccinated, you are not starting at square one. You've generated immune response that is going to have some cross-protective immunity. So for example, so far, the variants we've seen, the one that's the most divergent is Beta. So this is the variant that was first detected in South America. Beta had a lot of mutations where the antibody response to Beta took a hit. It wasn't a complete nullification of that antibody response, but definitely took a hit in terms of its ability to neutralize a virus in a dish. Now, the cellular immunity, in particular the T cell response, did not take a hit against Beta. In fact, some of our T cells can recognize SARS-CoV-2 that have been previously trained to recognize other circulating coronaviruses. So this exquisite specificity of the immune response is a little more relaxed when it comes to the T cell response. And so if we take Beta as an example, and it's a good example because it's the most mutated of the bunch, then hopefully T cells will still be able to respond to Omicron. And I think there's a good chance they will. So no, what you are doing is not for naught. If I think it's a double not. So people should, if they haven't been vaccinated, this is the best way that they can prepare for Omicron. And we know that vaccine companies are already adjusting their vaccine strategies to deal with Omicron.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.